Welcome to AI Gone Mad. I'm Kevin McDonald, and with me here is Ciaran Foley, the CEO of Kendall AI, a computer scientist and lifetime friend of mine. And we're here to talk about what is coming up a lot in the public discourse, and that has to do with the whole environmental issue around AI. But I don't know that people realize the impact. Ciaran, we've been talking a lot about this lately, and the more I see the stories, the more concerned I am becoming that I was actually bothered by the overreach of climate control and all this kind of craziness that I thought was used as a financial motive.
Yeah,
But now we've decided that since AI is important, we're just going to forget about all that stuff. So we're going the opposite direction.
that's right. And for our audience, AI doesn't really live in the cloud, it lives in buildings. And so those buildings need land, electricity, cooling, chips, copper, water transformers, everything, backup generators. And what we're looking at here is AI is a huge consumer of electricity. You've got training and running models, which takes electricity. You've got water consumption to cool the buildings and the facilities. You've got carbon emissions from that. You've got materials and things that have to be used to create the data centers themselves. So that has a waste product. And then, of course, you've got local land use impact and, of course, groups and society, housing complexes and things of that nature. So the locals are impacted as well. So the question is, we need all this compute. Is it worth it? And strange, just something to riff off of recently, we had about a 50% pullback on the number of data centers that are being built at the moment. So
I think there's a couple of things going on there. One, small towns are waking up, and some states, in fact, are saying if you want to build it, you have to provide your own power and you're going to have to use recycled water. The insane impact of the amount of water that these things consume, anywhere from 1 million to several million gallons a day for a single inference data center. And you take that times hundreds of them in some states that are already water stressed. That's insane. Think about it. We've been told, I lived most of my life in California, and you were literally told you have to take a shower. You're only allowed X number of gallons per day, and it was a ridiculous small amount of water. But now all of a sudden, all the limits are off for data centers. And in fact, Lake Tahoe, I don't know if you saw that story. 49,000 people were told that by May of next year they have to find a new power provider because the Nevada servicer is taking back the power to give it to AI. And so, to me, the insanity of that, one is with the environmental impact, it's going to take years to get a new power source. And two, when did we decide that making cat videos and memes is more important than making sure that a local community has water?
yeah, well, I'm not sure I agree with that because we know that, like, for instance, when we look at the race between China and the US, this is where the real impetus is for this stuff. It's not really the entertainment value. It's the what we perceive to be a national security issue. And that goes to the heart of defense. It goes to the heart of deception in elections and modifying election results. It goes to surveillance and things like that. So I think that's really where the race condition is being set. That said, what's interesting on this side too is that the very conditions that we thought might restrict China are actually accelerating their growth. So the fact that we're limiting technology has set a flag up, and they're just being more ingenious. And the truth of the matter is, over here, you might have, 100,000, a few 100,000 people working on AI. Over there, they've got over 1 million people. So I think this is a race that's just going to continue. On the water issue, you're absolutely right. The Monterey Park, California, just recently banned data centers in June 2026, so just this month. And they had proposed a 250,000 square foot facility, and residents just stood up and said, no, not in our backyard, right? Rising utility costs, proximity to homes, environmental impact. Coachella is considering a moratorium for a 450-acre data center. So, yeah, there's a lot of pushback with this stuff. At the same time, though, there is new technology. For instance, I just saw something the other day where a new type of cooling technology is being considered, wherein very deep pipelines are thrust into the Earth's crust, and hot water essentially is piped through these things. And, excuse me, it's not for cooling, it's actually for energy production. So what they end up using is mantle crust heat to power the data center. Not,
Yeah.
But these things obviously are going to take several iterations. And the thing is, I think the scale of these developments is really what's setting
And
people on edge.
yeah, I think so. You and I agree on the defense issue. And there's no doubt that I'm probably one of the earlier ones who said we have to win the AGI and ultimately win the, let's call it the race to the best. But I don't believe inference data centers are necessary for that. My belief is that inference data centers are for localized use of AI, and that they really are just a way of providing a closer, more local compute. They're not, you can build giant data center complexes that do what you're concerned about without going into a small town like mine, a town of 251 that already has drying up wells, and some SOB investor decides, yeah, you know what, I'm going to buy up 12,000 acres of farmland and suck all the water out of the ground and F you. So, no, I think we have to decide one, there are military uses, there are commercial uses, and then there's the stupid. There's a lot. Let's just use an example. I read a stat yesterday that says that every 100 words in a prompt consumes a liter of water under the current construct. So that's pretty insane if you think about it from the cooling point. But even if it's 1,000 words, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is that water is being lost to evaporation. It's not going back into the water table. Many of these data centers are being built in places in the Midwest where its farming is critical. They're consuming massive amounts of acreage for the property itself. They're then putting up solar panels to support it as their way of claiming they're offsetting the use of electricity, but all that does is use up even more farmland. And then the water recycling issue is a problem because they have two different types of cooling. I'm reading that there's air cooling, but the air cooling has resonance problems.
Yes.
If you've ever been to a flat place like the Midwest, sound carries in ways that it's hard to even believe. You can hear a truck on a highway from 2 miles away, where in a denser area, you're not going to have that issue. So if you've got this giant data center blowing fans, yeah, okay, so it saves water, uses more electricity, and it creates resonance. And there are, I don't know if you saw Erin Brockovich is now in this fight, and she's now taken, I think, 2,700 complaints about people that are getting ill from the outputs of data centers that are close to residential homes and areas like that. So,
yeah, there's no question there's an issue there. On that other statistic, that was more of a viral statistic. So a useful anchor is that in 2025, Sam Altman stated that an average ChatGPT query used about 0.32 milliliters of water. So basically, it's much lower than older estimates. And there are other estimates as well, but it's basically a milliliter of water per 1,000 tokens.
Total? What's the total?
So as an example, 1 million tokens, you're talking about between 0.1 and 4 liters of water. But that notwithstanding, the issue is still there for all of the other aspects of it, including water. I don't think you can wipe the slate clean no matter whether you obviate one of these or the other. There are a whole host of issues that have to be addressed. And a lot of that can be done through regulation, proper regulation, and then innovation, really.
Yeah, I think the innovation is going to be where it ultimately comes down to. But the number that I have in my notes is 746 billion liters of water in 2025 are consumed by AI. So
yep. A lot,
the different thing is consumed.
Yep.
In most cases, it is not recycling back into the water table. And you saw what happened. I mean, we both lived in California, the Central Valley. There were signs that were 6 feet taller because the ground was sinking due to the fact that they were pulling so much water out of the ground. And aquifers don't refill just because water hits the ground. It has to go through, the geological process to make itself to replenish and then filter cleanly. The other issue I found in my research last week was that they are doing recycling into lakes, for example, here in the Midwest. And it's changing the ecology because they're taking cold water out and putting warm water back in.
That's right. Yeah.
And so the water's going back, but it's screwing with the ecology. And it's very similar to what we saw, in the desert when they started putting in all the solar panels and those arrays of superheaters for electricity production. They were basically giant bug zappers.
Yes.
And bird killers. So I just find it ironic that the same people that were so hardcore about climate and the environment are now like all AI and don't worry about it. It's all going to be okay.
Well, I don't know whether we can paint such a broad brushstroke, but I do agree that this is something where we really have to get our arms around it, because there's no way that, whatever type of capacity you build out, it's going to be used at the moment. That's where we're at. And the challenge is that there's so much money behind this and so much opportunity from a purely economic standpoint that there's a lot to gain by simply squelching opposition of this sort and not doing things quote unquote properly.
So opportunity for who?
It's for the right, exactly.
That's really the question, and that's why this is why I'm on the environmental side at this point, because the lies that are being told. I've watched multiple online, let's call them town halls here in the Midwest, and what they're being told about, we're going to bring all these jobs and we're going to do, you know what, you're completely full of crap. The average data center has a few people in it. Most of the people that are in it are specialists who come from outside of the area.
Yeah.
The promises are just not accurate. And then the reality is, you've mentioned yourself, the financial bubble, the amount of money that's being spent based on the current economic model is not sustainable.
Right.
And that, to me, from the environmental impact, is even worse, because now you're going to have massive facilities that are 1,200, 12,000 acres in some cases that are abandoned, similar to large buildings in big cities. And what's the environmental impact of that? Something I don't want to miss. Here where I live, the water recycles into permeable land, and it's flood. Indiana floods a lot. And if you put too much concrete and you remove too much of the open arid farmland, you are going to end up with flood zones that are not predictable.
Yeah.
And so there's another example of, I guess, an unintended impact. And for what? So
and there's another question. Sorry to interrupt.
Let's do something here if you can.
Yeah.
Explain to the viewers the difference between a primary and an inference data center.
So with regards to training versus inference, data centers could be used in a hybrid mode where they're used for both. But in the case of training, right, the training is used specifically to train models and set weights within those models. So huge volumes of data are ingested for a period of time. They're used to actually calculate and create these frontier models, as they're known. Inference is used at the edge essentially to fuel when you have a chat with one of these LLMs. So they're two different modes essentially. Now where they're housed, can be mixed. And in fact, what we're seeing right now is an interesting move with, just the other day, Jensen Huang from NVIDIA just announced a new TPU, or processing unit, neural processing unit, essentially an AI chip, which is now going to be powering all the new Windows laptops and computers. And what we're seeing, I think, is perhaps a shift in the attitude. The thought is that the bigger the model, the more the power, the better off we are. But now we're finding out that actually smaller models that are more focused at the edge and distributed could be a lot more not only friendly to the environment and efficient and also privacy preserving, because you'd have the opportunity to run these at home without giving everybody your data for certain types of tasks, but also more cost effective as well. So an interesting switch, and something that I think has been coming. It's just that things are happening so fast here. I think that gets to your point, which is building out gigantic, old-scale, large buildings and huge infrastructure. A lot of these companies, I think they've pulled back and they're starting to recalculate when they need to do those things and how.
Yeah, and I think an important note to localizing, it's very similar to compute. We localized compute in the home PC, not the business PC necessarily, of course, because cloud is supposed to be the more economic, more friendly model because it's all centralized and shared security and all that kind of stuff. But the thing for me in the environmental impact issue is that inference means you are doing a direct interaction with it, and it's pulling answers from the model directly to you. And the claim is that because it's local, it's faster. And I'm like, no, the latency of decent internet today, it really doesn't matter where the data center is, so it's a BS argument. And, the distance between here and Texas is no different than the distance between here and town, as far as I'm concerned. over a decent internet connection. I think it really comes down to the lack of power, and I don't mean power, electricity, political power, in small Midwestern and the southern states and places that they just come in and they steamroll the city council, they steamroll the county, they offer a bunch of BS incentives and money. Oh, we're going to make all this. It's very similar to stadiums. They don't make any money on stadiums. It's just status, you know?
Yeah. I think if you look at it in its sort of purest form, companies, when you look at these data centers, I think if you take that sort of greed mentality, these things are just basically money printing factories for those who own them. And so you look at converting intelligence to money. That's it. That's all it is. Now, intelligence in air quotes. To your point about speed, yeah, the speed of the model really has nothing to do with the physical pipeline, because in terms of the data getting to you, whether on your laptop or from a data center, is negligible, and you're only passing text. What really makes the model fast or feel fast to you is actually the compute that's behind it. And that comes down to the chips behind it. One of the big bottlenecks to this technology is the speed of memory, because a lot of the models have very large memory requirements. They have to be held in the computer's memory. And that has been a bottleneck up until fairly recently with local inference models, where you would need 64 to 128 gigabytes of memory just to hold the model in place. So that's been a challenge. And right now we're also facing a chip shortage, and expenses are through the roof, but that will change over time.
So you brought up China, and this is where, people say I'm a bit schizophrenic, and that is because I do have genuine concerns that we cannot be left behind. But I believe that fear is what's being used to, excuse what's going on in some places.
Yeah.
More importantly, power, as one of the leading AI people who traveled to China said, China's building coal plants every week. And we couldn't build a new coal plant if our life depended on it at this point because of the environmental controls. Nuclear is certainly an option. Micronuclear or localized nuclear, I think, is probably where we're going in the end. But I don't believe traditional power output, certainly not solar and wind, is going to be enough to power a large inference data center. It's just silly to even try to say that it will, especially in an area where the sun is inconsistent and the wind is inconsistent. So at one point we have to decide, do we lean into the creation of more energy, which I believe we should, and then say to the AI producers, whoever they are, if you want to use power, you have to produce it, or you have to subsidize it one way or the other. The idea that Granny living in a farm 400 miles from, the data center just happens to be in the same generation region has to pay a higher bill because they want to make a faster, smarter model is silly.
Yeah.
So,
and it's interesting too, and I think we need to change our perspective too on remuneration. So Bernie Sanders recently came out with an idea that people in general should be remunerated for the use of their knowledge and society's data, essentially, to train these models in the first place. They should be participating in the success of the AI companies.
Yes.
Likewise, with these data centers, why couldn't there be a hybrid model where the locals are actually benefiting from the data center that they're hosting? Of course, with the caveat that you don't want it damaging human beings, you don't want it damaging the ecology, you don't want it damaging that society. But if you can get around those things, with technology, and then give it some room to grow, why not have it be the next sort of gold rush for the society? I think the real problem here is we're seeing a bifurcation in terms of the haves and have-nots in this country. And
without a doubt,
increasingly those that control the AI keys or can pay for those tokens, they're going to move ahead to a degree to which nobody else can catch up. And yet it's on the back of all of the people that can't catch up in terms of structure, energy, pollution, et cetera, et cetera.
Amen. And on that note, we should talk more about the financial incentives and how it's a perverse incentive right now, and that is that the locals give tax breaks, they pay more for electricity, they lose their water rights, and they get absolutely nothing in return.
What's the promise back? That jobs are going to be created? Let's not kid ourselves, right? The data centers can be run with a modicum of human beings. It's not, and So think about the age that we're moving into. We're actually restricting the participation of human beings in great swaths of our society over the next 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
makes no sense whatsoever. The only thing it would make sense is that if that data center is generating wealth for the participants in that community.
Agreed.
That's the only way it makes sense. So
We'll have to talk about the financial models in our next episode. And with that said, you've been watching AI Gone Mad. I'm Kevin McDonald, and with me today has been Ciaran Foley, and we'll see you next time.
all right. See you later, Kev. Okay. All righty.